The flashing red and blue lights painted the night like a warning. A sleek black sedan idled at a traffic light, engine humming softly, when the siren screamed. The driver, a calm and poised black woman in her 40s, took a deep breath. She'd been through worse, but not tonight. Not this kind of confrontation. The officer strode up, eyes sharp, hand already on his holster. "License and registration," he barked, suspicion dripping from every syllable. Her calm voice tried to diffuse the tension, but his tone only grew harder. Moments later, backup arrived. By the time the situation ended, she was in handcuffs, and yet the real shock came the next morning when he saw her again, but this time in a black robe behind the bench. Her name was Danielle Roberts, known in her city as a brilliant legal mind and one of the youngest judges ever appointed to the district court. Off the bench, she was a mother of two, an advocate for community reform, and a quiet believer in fairness, even for those who didn't deserve it. That night, she was driving home from a late dinner with her sister, a rare night off. No courtroom, no robe, no security, just her, a simple black car, and a playlist of old jazz that reminded her of her father, the police officer. Sergeant Cole Matthews was new in town, eager to prove himself. Hardened by years of chasing stolen vehicles, he spotted Danielle's car and thought it matched the description of a stolen vehicle reported nearby. He didn't run the plates carefully. He didn't pause to assess. He saw a black woman in a nice car, and his assumptions did the rest. As she handed him her license, she noticed the hesitation in his eyes turn into arrogance. Her words were calm, measured. But in his mind, calmness meant defiance, and defiance meant guilt. He called for backup. She was ordered out. Neighbors peeked through curtains as she was pressed against her own car, cuffed and accused. Her phone fell to the pavement. Her dignity with it. By the time they confirmed the car wasn't stolen, the damage was already done. The officers let her go with an awkward half-apology, and she drove home in silence, tears she didn't let fall. But the story didn't end there. Because the very next morning, her courtroom schedule had a new case, and the arresting officer's name was at the top of it. The courtroom buzzed with quiet chatter as Sergeant Matthews entered, oblivious to who he was about to face. He adjusted his badge, his tie, his pride. It was supposed to be a simple hearing, a procedural matter after an arrest gone wrong. But as the clerk announced, "All rise," his smirk faded. Judge Danielle Roberts stepped through the side door, poised, graceful, controlled, and as her eyes met his, the room froze. No one else knew what had happened the night before, but he did, and she did, and the silence that followed carried the weight of 1,000 unsaid truths. Her voice, steady and professional, opened the session. "Sergeant Matthews, I understand this hearing concerns a civil complaint filed against the department." His throat tightened. "Yes, Your Honor." The same voice that barked orders now trembled under the weight of authority. Every question she asked was precise, surgical. Every answer he gave chipped away at the shield of arrogance he wore, but beneath her composure, Danielle battled something deeper: anger, humiliation, the memory of cold metal around her wrists. She could have recused herself. She could have chosen to walk away, but she didn't, because sometimes the lesson must be seen, not just spoken. As testimony unfolded, details of his behavior came to light: body cam footage, dispatch logs, contradictions. The audience gasped quietly when the footage played, a silent, undeniable truth filling the room. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her silence spoke louder. When his attorney tried to justify his actions as a misunderstanding, Danielle leaned forward. Her tone was calm, but her words were razor-sharp. Misunderstanding happens when there's confusion. This was assumption, built on prejudice. The courtroom held its breath. And for the first time, Sergeant Matthews looked at her not as a suspect, but as a mirror reflecting everything he'd refused to see. As the hearing neared its end, Danielle faced a choice. She could let the matter be dismissed, a quiet internal affair, or she could use her voice to set a precedent. The silence was heavy when she finally spoke. "This isn't just about me," she began. "It's about every person who's been stopped, searched, or humiliated because someone couldn't see past their own bias." Her voice didn't shake. It echoed. Every word carved itself into the air, a quiet rebellion against silence. "The badge," she said, "is meant to protect, not persecute. And the robe," she looked down at her own, "isn't meant for revenge, but for justice." The courtroom was still. Even the ticking clock seemed to pause. Sergeant Matthews lowered his eyes, for the first time, not out of guilt alone, but recognition. The Internal Affairs Department launched a full investigation. His suspension came within the week, not because she demanded it, but because truth did. And when she finally stepped out of that courtroom, Danielle didn't smile. She simply exhaled. Because justice, when done right, doesn't roar. It whispers, and the world listens. "The badge," she said, "is meant to protect, not persecute. And the robe," she looked down at her own, "isn't meant for revenge, but for justice." The courtroom was still. Even the ticking clock seemed to pause. Sergeant Matthews lowered his eyes, for the first time not out of guilt alone, but recognition. The Internal Affairs Department launched a full investigation. His suspension came within the week, not because she demanded it, but because truth did. And when she finally stepped out of that courtroom, Danielle didn't smile. She simply exhaled. Because justice, when done right, doesn't roar. It whispers, and the world listens. Sergeant Matthews requested a private meeting months later, not as an officer, but as a man seeking forgiveness. She didn't promise absolution, but she told him something that would stay with him forever. Justice isn't about punishment. It's about understanding what broke you and making sure you never break someone else the same way. He left in silence, and for the first time in his career, listened. Danielle continued her work, not for revenge, but reform. Her story became a quiet legend in the city's courthouse halls. And sometimes, when young officers trained in bias workshops watched her recorded speech, they didn't see a victim. They saw a teacher. A reminder that respect isn't earned by power, but by humility. Because sometimes, the person you try to put in handcuffs is the same one who will one day teach you what justice really means.